They are they're shocking and quite saddening scenes. We've seen these sorts of things before, of course, after like the Rodney King race riots in the early 1990s, and the death of Lloyd George was a shocking and sickening act, and it clearly does need to be investigated and the officers responsible held accountable. I think these protests have got out of hand, though, to state the obvious. I mean, what started off as legitimate and thoughtful, peaceful protests have either been seized or hijacked by certain elements that are turning into looting and property damage. And look, this doesn't reflect well on the United States, and it doesn't reflect well on the citizens involved in it. So I'd urge everyone to cool it a little and just engage in peaceful protests.
Well, and this is what happens, isn't it, Dave? I mean, we see this all the time, not just on this instance, but we saw it in Baltimore a couple of years ago, and even when I was in London for the London riots, it was a similar thing. It starts off as protests that relate to police brutality against minorities, and then all of a sudden the anarchists take over, and it's all about, raging against the machine. It's about looting, it's about getting into stores and burning cars and just setting fire to anything, so the message gets completely lost.
Yeah, that's quite right, and there seem to be these anarchists, worldwide who want to jump on any grievance and exploit it to sort of attack the state, attack the institutions of state power, be it the police, the government, whoever's wearing a uniform and whatnot. And I think, look, there's certainly an element of that here. There's a lot of people out there who, I think are protesting for the right reasons because they want to draw attention to this issue and they want to express their dissatisfaction that these sorts of, murders continue to happen in the United States, and that's fair enough and that's legitimate. What's not legitimate is, torching police cars or breaking into shops and, not beating down doors.
We're just watching these live pictures in DC at the moment, just outside the White House, where these lines of protesters at the moment are kind of lining up against pretty heavy-handed police that are there to do their job, no doubt. But it goes to show, particularly what's going on with the SpaceX stuff over the weekend, Dave. You've got a tale of two cities that's taking place in the US at the moment. You've got these anarchists that have completely steered the country towards a level of that things are out of control, and then you've got this space exploration that's happening where the two astronauts docked this morning at the International Space Station, which just shows how America can move so far ahead.
Look, that's a tremendous achievement, actually, the SpaceX launch and docking today. And to state the obvious, it's not getting the attention or profile it deserves. I mean, the United States also made a number of important announcements over the weekend regarding Hong Kong and China, and they are also not getting much airplay or airtime, given the focus on the riots and the protests. That's understandable, but it's a strange dichotomy, no doubt about it.
What do you make it? Donald Trump moved to ban Antifa this morning, which I think is short for anti-fascist. It's an organisation that Donald Trump has banned it, calls it a terrorist organisation. It's a militant left-wing political activist group. But what do you make of his position? And we read out some of his tweets earlier, blaming the media for sort of igniting all of this. Is he missing the point as well?
Well, look, I think it would be hard to ascribe, blame for this to any one single organisation or one section of the media or anything else like this. And I think, in a time of crisis, the job of a national leader is to try and, heal and repair social divisions and try and get the country to calm down a little. Look, I don't know much about Antifa. I don't know if they've got a recognised leadership, a constitution, a board. Can they be banned? If they can be, look, I'm sure the United States and the administration will explore that. But I think it's pretty clear that these protests, they're obviously very widespread. They're happening in a number of cities. I can't imagine they've got a high degree of centralised coordination or control. So they reflect, I think, some, more deeper lying problems that are really what are crying out to be addressed here.
Just on Donald Trump, he wants us to join the G7. What do you think of this?
I think it'd be great. I mean, I remember when I was pretty young at the time, but when the G7 was formed, Australia was a candidate to be included alongside Canada because it was formed in 1975 with 6 nations. I think Canada was included the following year, and it would have been an obvious opportunity for Australia to be involved then. But I think it would make a lot of sense now. There's a lot of countries with whom we work very closely there, Japan, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy. And I think, we'd be a natural fit with a lot of these countries, and we'd help, coordinate our efforts in a time where there's a lot more international turmoil and international uncertainty. So I'd very much welcome the invitation. I'm sure we'll look positively at it.
And it may come at the expense of China being there. Will that irk them?
Well, look, I think China's in the G20. I mean, there's a bigger forum, the G20, which we're part of. That includes countries like, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Turkey. It's a bigger grouping. It's more broadly representative of the world, but it means it can be harder to get agreement. Whereas I think the G7, meaning G7 without Russia, I think is a group of like-minded nations that share a common interest and common perspective on a lot of the issues and challenges facing the world right now. Look, you can have multiple groupings in international affairs. It's not either or. It's usually the sum of many.
Just finally, Dave, just on Hong Kong, who we've got a free trade agreement with, do we have a plan to follow Donald Trump and downgrade trading privileges?
Look, I don't think so at this stage. I mean, our free trade agreement was only ratified and came into force in January of this year. It does recognise, of course, that Hong Kong is a separate economic entity and a separate jurisdictional entity. Now, if that was ever to change, well, I think that we'd need to revisit that. But for now, I think it's it's very much in force. We are obviously concerned about this national security legislation that Beijing is pushing onto Hong Kong. It doesn't seem to be consistent with the handover agreement or the basic law or Hong Kong status under one country, two systems. And I think this is something we'll continue to follow closely and express concern about.